Watch what's approaching, the supreme moment. Reality striking closer than it seems, don't it? Go ahead, it's for the taking if you want it. If not, the dream dies and you'll be forever haunted. Then confront it.
What's good? So the Heroes banner has, I guess, tapered off a little bit. I think plenty of people had time to summon at this point. And I kind of made a post on Twitter yesterday kind of identifying some of the potential problems that come about, with the Heroes collab banner that comes out every year at the same time. In summary, it really does come down to the fact that a lot of Elder Kais, Sleeping Kais, or Dozing Kais is what they're called in Global, I think, but along with that, Potential Orbs and whatnot. I mean, it's just so many new units, and some of the other units that you haven't acquired in the past, they just become so readily available depending on how lucky you get that... Yeah, all the reserves ultimately you have in your deck with Elder Kais and Dozing Kais and also Potential Orbs. They take a massive hit every year whenever you summon on these banners, and that's ultimately a problem. But before we go into some of the details as to what I'm thinking, let's just run through some of your guys' feedback as to quote unquote how many of your Elder Kais got destroyed from the reserve after summoning on the Heroes Collab banner. So let's just run through a couple of these and kind of talk through a couple of people's feedbacks, like Nindo X Soul. Some things we just keep quiet. You can kind of assume what direction that went. AC's talking about all of them, not just send my orbs to, Kim says, and obviously that's a very good point. When you pick up new units, 55% it still takes orbs, let alone additional dupes that come with it. So a lot of stuff are unfortunately casualties of the game when it comes to Heroes Collab banner. Alex saying the same thing, and Boodle's talking about, fortunately only a few were losses. I only pulled Toa and Gohan. So it really does depend on your summoning luck. If you're able to pull a bunch of units, your problems are pretty much exponentialized versus some of those that are shafted that only pick up a couple of new units, which still does take a fair amount of investments. You know what I mean? Like the non-farmable super attacks for some of these units, I mean, it literally takes you 9 Elder Kais or Dozing Kais if you're lucky in order to get the SA to 10 and whatnot. Daiko's talking about having 120 Kais. He's good, whatever, and whatnot. I'm sure you still took a hit depending on the units you ended up acquiring. Raptor's Delight just laughing out loud, basically just probably indicating how many reserves he's got. But at the end of the day, you still do take hits, regardless of how many you have in reserve. Looks like Infinite's got a decent amount left over. So it's really about, I guess, like how actively you're raising unit super attack, how heavy is your grind, how much of a hoarder you are when it comes to Elder Kais and whatever. So it really does depend on each person. The cost was everything. Toonarami and Goresh are probably going at it, like the siblings rivalry they have. Over 100 still haunts me, and then Goresh is over there kind of, giving him a little shit about Dokkaning responsibly and whatnot. But the point being, it takes a massive hit. I thought I saw Nolar somewhere talking about, who wastes Kais, when you only need to pull 15 copies of the unit, whatever. And pretty much, I think across the board, a lot of people are talking about how, it did take quite a bit of Kais to get the SAs. Like some people just simply lost count, like Jake the Dog and, Darkson's talking about, I think, like 50. I think, it's probably 50's probably somewhere in the region of the medium, I guess, in terms of like the overall player base, in terms of like requirements, in terms of like having to raise SA for everybody and whatnot. I think that's pretty much the extent of, there's probably a longer list. Yeah, I haven't, it's not fully updated, but, I think the story is similar across the board, which simply put, I mean, it's just such a massive amount required. And, Kim kind of talked about this a little bit too, but it really does come down to not just the Kais that are required to raise a super attack, but also the Potential Orb investments in terms of, you want to make sure the units are good, especially when you pull multiple copies. I've seen a fair amount of people rainbow some of the units off the banners with only a decent amount of stones. So the fact that it's a guaranteed pickup does complicate the scenario a little bit. It's great that your odds of pulling it are much higher than your standard Dokkan banner, but at the same time, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? It's a good problem to have ultimately at the end of the day, but it's still a problem nonetheless. So yeah, it brings up a point. Like, you know, they came out with a new unit this time around. I guess her name is like Demon God Salsa or whatever it was, but you know, that's obviously a farmable, you know, unit since it's a free-to-play unit. But outside of that, you know, we really didn't get any farmable super attack or free-to-play story acquired unit, and they really have to at least introduce like 2 units you can farm with the super attack. It's just not only unreasonable, but it's ultimately unsustainable in terms of just having that requirement of such an extravagant level, you know. I personally feel like they should at least introduce at the minimum like 2 to 3 free-to-play units that you can actually farm the super attack with the summonable units. Otherwise, you're just going to continue to run into this issue. Like, and honestly, we can do a 1-year lag where, you know, let's say for example, like the older units like Super Saiyan 3, Gohan, and Trunks, they have a free-to-play version introduced where you can farm the SA or whatever. But I guess it doesn't really matter because at that point, most people probably farm the super attacks 10 anyway. So I guess to make it really work, it does have to be current banner units. At least make, you know, 2 of them available to farm the super attack. I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable to do that. So I really hope going forward they do that. And maybe with the Potential Orb system, they'll introduce like a story event where you can actually, you know, farm the Potential Orbs specific to the Dragon Ball Heroes units or whatever, you know. In this case, like there was a brand new category with, you know, the crossover category and whatnot. So maybe make an event where you can actually farm Potential Orbs for the crossover category specific units. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea where you introduce, you know, different levels of Potential Orbs, just similar, like almost similar to the skill orbs, where they're specific to categories. They could introduce both of that, you know, through an additional event where you can farm the Potential Orbs for that category and also for the skill orbs. You know, I think it would be a massively good idea. They've done this with the skill orbs on several occasions. You know, the latest one being the I think it was grade 8 power category, you know, with the added stage for the story event. But you know, they really need to do this type of stuff. Otherwise, people are just going to continue to run into problems. I guess the best way to avoid it is to plan ahead. But I mean, when you pick up like 10 new units all at once, for example, you know, that is a lot of Elder Kais or Dozing Kais that it requires, let alone the Potential Orbs that come with it. So they really should, at least for next year, start thinking about that kind of stuff. If they do want to improve, you know, the overall player experience, and I understand, you know, having the Elder Kais being required to be used, that does promote activity in terms of like the consumption of rare luxurious items and whatever. And you know, we do have the semi-monthly Elder Kai banner where you can get 10 copies for 50 stones, but you know, that's still, you know, somewhat of a luxury tax, so to speak, you know. So it's you know, a little bit up in the air. There are things to kind of go through. I don't know if in the comments people have talked about, you know, not only just the consumption standpoint, but also what would potentially make it better. But I think for the most part, people are responding as, you know, how many they spend and, you know, whatever. And that's kind of the problem. Yeah, there's Nolar's comment about why would you be burning Kais? Just pull 15 copies of Rainbow and SA10. Yeah, I mean, not everybody's a whale, you know what I'm saying? These guys have quote unquote special privileges when it comes to that, you know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, it'd be great if it was simple as that, but for those guys it is. But for most of us normal quote unquote peasants, it's not necessarily the case, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's a problem. It's a good problem to have, but ultimately it is a problem nevertheless. So I think, you know, something definitely should get updated next year when it comes to this stuff. And honestly, like, yeah, like the banners are going to continue to come out, you know, like we're having the transforming Bojack coming out next, and then we have, you know, potentially the double raids banner toward the end of December, and then obviously, you know, late January we're gonna have six year anniversary. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and the fact that, you know, we're already running through burning Elder Kais and whatnot just to be able to, you know, get the super attack on these units to SA10 and whatnot is just crazy. I think the other thing that probably would have helped with this is if they actually introduced like an easy A for one of the units for, you know, the Dragon Ball Heroes units. I think that would have at least provided opportunities for them to implement a way where you could acquire the Elder Kais, potential orbs, and various, awakening metals and whatnot that come with it. And honestly, it would probably work out pretty well if they did introduce one of the units to get an EZA where, you get the rewards out of that. So it would potentially not only it's pretty much killing two birds with one stone, right? You're getting an opportunity for an EZA on a unit, but also being able to acquire some of the additional rewards that come out of it that would offset some of the uses of Elder Kais from the other units that you need at SA10 and whatnot. So I mean, those are really just random thoughts in my head, and that's kind of what I'm thinking. But hopefully next year they kind of take time to take a step back and just kind of reflect back on each of the celebrations. I really hope year end they kind of do this stuff, and really it needs to happen in terms of like a company strategy standpoint. So I'm sure they do at this point, and maybe they can expand on it next year when it comes out. But overall, I mean, it was a pretty decent celebration in terms of like the banners and some of the stuff that came out of it. But again, it's more or less a filler for the greater things coming up. So Kais and orbs are definitely a casualty at this point, and hopefully they come up with a little bit better of a system maybe, and we'll see what happens. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Feel free to let me know what your recommendations are and what you'd like to see them do, and we'll take the conversation from there. So as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching. I will catch you guys later.